Hi, it's Musharraf Hussain with the subject of interpreting taxing statutes. Our today's topic is structure of an act. An act is in very standard form. The structure, the structure of an act are generally in a standard form. Every modern act has a short title by which it may be cited, which is followed by a number of components which are descriptive in nature and which for the most part owe their existence to the procedure by which an act is enacted. The operative part, however, of an act consists of the sections and any schedules. Sections of an act may be grouped together in numbered parts or chapters. Short title. All modern acts have a short title which is a brief label by which an act may be cited or referred to in other documents. The short title should be short and informative. Its purpose is not as a political slogan. The short title is usually devised by the drafter who strives to keep it brief and informative. And if the short title is too long, then it ceases to be a convenient label and thus defeats the purpose. The structure of the short title is that it invariably ends with the word act followed by a comma and calendar year. For example, Income Tax Act, 1961. In usage, however, comma is usually dropped while citing or referring the act. The short title is printed on the cover and at the beginning of the act and is usually given by the first section. For example, Section 1, Clause 1 of the Income Tax Act 1961 reads as follows. This act may be called the Income Tax Act 1961. As the act is and has to be referred by that name, the use of the word may, unless it is construed as meaning shall, would appear to be somewhat inappropriate. But the justification of may is that it is perhaps that act could also be referred to in some other manner so long as the reference is clear. For example, an act may be cited by reference to the number and year also, as provided in the General Clause Act, Section 28, Clause 1. The subsection could even be eliminated. The subsection which appears in Section 1, which carries the word of the short title, could even be eliminated if the interpretation or General Clause Act included a provision to the effect that every act of Parliament shall be called cited by the name printed at the head thereof. Repeal of an act. The act continued to be cited by its short title even after its repeal. For example, Central Excise Act 1944, which has been repealed by Section 174, Clause 1 of the Central Goods and Services Tax Act 2017, is still being cited as Central Excise Act 1944 while referring to its provisions. Short title is rarely amended or renamed. Amendments made to an act may require it to be renamed by changing its short title, but it is not usually desirable to rename an act since it falsifies the history and may create confusion over reference which use the previous short title because they date from before the change. However, there may be occasions where amendments render the original short title unhelpful so that it needs amending. For example, Central Excise and Salt Act 1944 was renamed as Central Excise Act 1944, while Section 1 of the Finance No. 2 Act of 1996, serial number 33 of 1996, to delete the word and salt because this has become redundant. For post-independence, the manufacturing of salt did not attract any duty. Other components of the Act following the short title is serial number, date of passing, long title, preamble, if any. It is not necessary that always there will be a preamble, and the enacting formula. So out of the five things, apart from the short title, preamble is, if required, if desired by the legislature, is given. Otherwise, the four are almost mandatory. Serial number. Every act is assigned a serial number. The numbering runs from the beginning of each calendar year. For example, Income Tax Act 1961 carries the serial number 43 of 1961, where 43 is the serial number of the Income Tax Act. Out of the serial number, this varies. If it is for the Parliament, if it is a central act, then it is the serial of that Parliament. If it is a legislative, if it is an act of the legislature of the state, then it bears the serial number of that legislature of that very state. So, where in the Income Tax Act, the serial number 43 shows that it is the serial number of the Income Tax Act out of the total number of acts enacted during the year 1961 by the Parliament. The serial number is usually put in parentheses after the short title, such as Income Tax Act 1961. In brackets, we can see that 43 of 1961 for citing the act. The significance of serial number is in determining which of two acts are receiving residential assent or the assent of the governor in case of a state act on the same date is to be treated as first in time. Where two acts passed on the same day are inconsistent, the serial number indicates which of them, being deemed the latter, is to prevail. Date of passing. Date of passing is the date of assent given to the act by the president or governor of a state. It is mentioned in an act in a square bracket. Long title. The long title begins with the words "an act to" and sets out in general terms the content or purpose of the act. The long title is not, however, designed as an interpreter's guide to the content. It is a remnant from the bill which, on presidential assent or the assent of the governor, became the act, and its true function relates to the bill rather than the act. Under the rules of parliamentary procedure or the procedure of any legislature of the state, the long title must cover everything in a bill. If the bill is amended so as to go wider than the long title is required to be amended to correspond. One important aspect of the long title to a bill is that it plays a role in determining the scope. So, in limiting the scope of the act, of the bill, it helps. So, in Lok Sabha, an amendment is out of order if it is outside the bill's scope. And broadly, similar principles apply in Rajya Sabha. So, the drafter seek to influence decisions about the scope by drawing the long title tightly. The long title for modern acts tends to be relatively short. For example, the long title of the Central Goods and Service Tax Act 2017 reads as follows: An act to make a provision for levy and collection of tax on intra-state supply of goods or services or both by the central government and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Preamble. As mentioned earlier, preamble is not a mandatory or necessary item, but sometimes, especially in old acts, it appears. A preamble states the purpose of the act and may recite the mischief that it is intended to remedy. It begins with the word whereas. In earlier times, albeit was also used. A preamble is an optional feature for public general acts and is rarely included. Preamble, for example, of the Central Excise Act 1944 reads as follows: whereas it is expedient to consolidate and amend the law relating to central duties of excise on goods manufactured or produced in certain part of India. Then comes the enacting formula. The enacting formula or purview of an act is the verbal formula expressing the act's nature as a command of the sovereign. So basically notice here the command. It is written, the sovereign says that now this is the law now. Sovereign may be the president or the governor in our case. It immediately follows the long title unless there is a preamble, in which case it follows the preamble. It is now purely formal with no direct significance in interpretation. The form adopted in India since 26 January 1950, adoption of the constitution. When India became a republic is as follows. The form is like this: be it enacted by parliament. If it is a state legislature, then legislature of the state, it will say that be it enacted by the legislature of the state, say of Bihar, UP, or whatever the state is there. In the calendar year, it mentions the year also of the Republic of India as follows. We'll see an illustration of all these things later. It may be mentioned here that the practice followed in Indian legislative body is to put the long title, preamble and the enacting formula to vote only after all the clauses of bill are put to vote and decided upon. Now we'll see the illustration of all those preliminary matters, excluding the sections and the schedules. This is the latest act of CGST, Central Goods and Service Tax Act. We have put the colors to highlight the different components. The first in yellow color is the short title. This is actually this picture from the Gazette notified by the government. So it was notified by Ministry of Law and Justice, Legislative Department. One can see and download and see what is the actual shape of that is there. So I have taken a snap of concerned portion only. So the yellow item being the short title, the Central Goods and Service Tax Act 2017. Then it is followed by the serial number 12 of 2017. Then you can see that number in blue with written as 12th April 2017. It shows the date of assent. As you can see that it is written also on the top by the Ministry of by the Legislative Department that the Act of Parliament received the assent of the President on 12th April 2017. After the date of passing, preamble is not appearing here. Preamble is a item of past now. So directly it is a long title is there. So the long title we have seen earlier also: an act to make provision for levy and collection of tax on interstate supply of goods or services or both by the central government and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. That is in the all in green color. Then in red color it is the enacting formula. Enacting formula is written like this: be it enacted by Parliament in the 68th year of the Republic of India as follows. Then the chapter begins and the other sections begins. So this is a very good illustration of all the preliminary materials which we have discussed just now. Thank you.